The Diocese of Baker. The faith was first planted here by missionary priests. It came of age under the leadership of its first bishop and is thriving today under the guidance of its current apostle, Bishop Cary.
It seems to me that one does go back to the very beginning, and that is, at least for me, every day I begin acknowledging that I'm a creature, that I'm before the mystery of God, that my life is a gift. This is as basic as it can get.
This is the story of the bishops of America, the shepherds of the past and the shepherds of today, who through their callings and ministry carry the church into the future. It's also the story of their parish, their church, the cathedral. This is The Chair, an exploration of what it means to be an apostle in America. Spread across the mountains, hills, and rivers that make up the eastern two-thirds of the gorgeous state of Oregon, the Mission Diocese of Baker has been an outpost of the faith in the American West for well over 100 years.
It's been said that Catholicism in Eastern Oregon is long on territory, short on members of the clergy and laity, as well as religious, but very long and steadfast on faith and the pioneer spirit, which brought the faith to what is called the dry side of Oregon over 160 years ago. I think in many ways this is still true. This part of Oregon, this diocese, is still seen as missionary territory. Priests still go out of their way to bring Eucharist to those who aren't necessarily anywhere near a parish, just as those early priests in the diocese either walked or rode on horseback to bring the faith to believers, as well as being beloved members of these very extended communities. So in many ways, both the past and the present are woven together and celebrated as people remember that as a community and through the receiving of the Eucharist, we are the body of Christ.
Eastern Oregon was originally inhabited by various Native American peoples, the Paiute, Cayuse, Umatilla, Walla Walla, and Nez Perce tribes, among others, who used the lush river valleys for both hunting and fishing. Now, as the population of the U.S. grew, and began to spread further and further west in search of riches and new opportunities, the Oregon Trail snaked north and west through what is now the city and county of Baker. In 1861, gold was discovered near the current town of Baker by 4 miners. This turns Baker almost overnight into a boomtown. The new town and county would both be named for Edward Baker, who, while fighting for the Union in 1861, had become the first sitting U.S. Senator to die in battle.
The city is officially incorporated in 1874, which really is a way in which it becomes connected with some of the other cities in the Pacific Northwest, mainly through the introduction of the railway system that begins to be built throughout this area. And as always, with the railway, we need people to work on them, but it also attracts people into an area as the transportation is easier to get in and out of. So as we're seeing the city grow, obviously the Catholic population is beginning to burgeon as well.
The Diocese of Baker was established in 1903 and covers the entire eastern two-thirds of the state. At the time of its founding, there were only about 3,000 Catholics scattered among the vast territory, which is fewer in number than many urban parishes at the time. One of the early histories of the diocese, written in 1930, described the ruggedness of the diocese, and it referred to both the terrain, but also to the Catholic population itself that had to endure a great isolation. That same diocesan history made a number of interesting comparisons between the Diocese of Baker and the Catholic Church's missions in China. They made comparisons between the two regions, especially the vast territory, the small Catholic population, and the need for priests. Part of the goal of that early history was to recruit support for the work of the diocese, hoping that some of the support that was being directed towards the foreign missions in China would be redirected to the domestic missions like Baker, Oregon.
The first bishop of the diocese, Charles O'Reilly, came from Portland, Oregon. As part of his work as bishop, he went on extensive begging tours in eastern dioceses in order to recruit finances and personnel to work in the region. He also attained the support of the Catholic Extension Society, which provided him with chapel rail cars that allowed him to bring the Mass and sacraments to isolated communities. These communities were not only isolated, but they were often also persecuted by virulent anti-Catholicism.
The state of Oregon had a history of anti-Catholic prejudice, and during the 1920s, the Klan was particularly active, and they worked to pass anti-Catholic legislation aimed at curtailing the expansion of Catholic education. One of the bills that was passed was a compulsory education law that would have required all students to attend a public school, effectively outlawing Catholic and private education in the state.
The second Bishop of Baker, Joseph McGrath, was an extraordinary champion of Catholic education, defending the newly built Catholic schools from both legal and physical attacks. He was working very hard to spearhead the growth and development, but he faced many challenges in these KKK-sponsored bills. Very often they were trying to close down the schools, so much so that Bishop McGrath at one point had each parish in the diocese form a committee to attack the ideas that the KKK were trying to push through at the very grassroots level.
Bishop McGrath, whose tenure lasted from 1919 until 1950, recognized that the parishes in Eastern Oregon were often not in a position to support their own school, so he worked to expand the CCD programs throughout the diocese.
He entrusted the work to a Franciscan sister who traveled around the diocese visiting parishes in order to recruit lay catechists and volunteers to ensure that all children had access to proper faith formation, including some who conducted CCD exercises as a correspondence course through mail-in homework exercises. The CCD program that he established soon attracted national attention, and other dioceses sent representatives to Oregon to see the work that they were doing, and it also became a model for CCD programs in other dioceses.
Under Bishop Connolly, the diocese expanded, working in particular to recruit Spanish-speaking candidates to the diaconate to work among the growing Hispanic population, which had first become a presence in the diocese in the 1950s, recruited to the region to work in the growing agricultural sector.
Today, the Diocese of Baker is still regarded as mission territory and has relied on a number of foreign-born priests who have been recruited to work in the diocese. This need for priests to work in a frontier territory is something that links together the experience of bishops in the diocese over its more than 100 years of history.
When I was raised in the 60s, there were very few Spanish-speaking people here. Now there are quite a few. Some of our parishes, the vast majority are Spanish-speaking. It's always a question of how to be able to reach them in the language of their birth, so to speak. And we're trying to do the best we can, integrating Spanish into the liturgy and so on. What's really, really impressive to me, and I have people come to mind as I say this, are those just the people in the parish that keep life going. They do it because this is the faith, and they want to hand it on, and they make great sacrifices, and they're just wonderful, wonderful. You can go in every parish and find people like this. And so it's a great, great addition to our diocese to have this new life that's been brought to us.
The mother church and center of liturgical prayer within the Diocese of Baker is the Cathedral of St. Francis De Sales. Completed in 1908, the cathedral was built and designed by the people of Baker, and it's made of local materials.
I have great affection for St. Francis de Sales as the patron of this cathedral and the patron of the diocese. I discovered him as his spiritual writings many years ago. Then I discovered that I shared the same birthday as he, so that really gives me a boost. He put his learning at service of very ordinary people, and very effectively, being able to reach out with gently and humbly. That's what most draws me to him.
The cathedral was completed in 1908, and it's a purpose-built cathedral. Really solid. It signals to us that this is a really significant church in the diocese. It's the most significant one because it houses the cathedra, the seat of the bishop. This cathedral goes through many changes over the course of its life. Because it's the most important church in any diocese, the cathedral often has a gradual building, adding decoration over time, and then making changes to make sure that it's in good maintenance and in good repair, but also aesthetic changes and liturgical changes that really relate to the prevalent philosophy of how the church should function. The building is dedicated in 1908. The stained glass windows are added in 1923. The stenciling comes in 1944. There are renovations made in the 1950s, again in the 1980s, and finally in the 2000s.
It strikes me, thinking of being in the cathedral, it strikes me as significant that our Lord was a carpenter and the son of a carpenter. Because what carpenters do, we have to tend to think automatically is you just build a house, you know? But a good part of carpentry is tearing things down. Tearing things down to renovate. I'm sitting here now where this cathedral has been renovated a number of times.
There are murals in the sanctuary dome, as well as Eucharistic symbols of the lamb and of wheat in the apse, which is where the sacrifice of the Mass takes place. You also have peaked arches. So there are 3 of these sort of reaching arches, 2 which have windows in them in the apse, and then all of the stained glass windows in the church, as well as the ribs, the groin vaults that have this sort of reaching quality that seeks to sort of pierce that verticality. Medieval sensibilities have a great interest in the ascending and descending. With those lifts breaking that horizontal space and those elements coming down, you have that integration in the terrestrial and the heavenly. So you have that coming together, which really is what happens in the liturgy.
The cathedral has the chair of the bishop, which is the teaching chair, and the teaching is firm and grounded and rooted and isn't going to change with the whims of the present time. What is taught here is going to remain true. What is done here is done at the altar. That's going to continue. When you walk in here, it may not be conscious, but you have a sense that we're talking about something permanent here. I can give myself to this. I'm a part of this great, great stream of people in the past that's going to go on into the future, and I'm part of it.
The chair inside the Cathedral of St. Francis de Sales represents Bishop Cary's role as the Apostle of Baker.
So I come from a Catholic family, an Irish Catholic family on both sides, and the faith was just at the absolute center of our life. I'm a native of Oregon. I was born in Portland, but then when I was 3, we moved to Prineville, which is right in dead center of the state. And I was raised there until I was 14, and then I went to the seminary at Mount Angel in the Willamette Valley in the Archdiocese of Portland. Then I went to Menlo Park, California for 1 year of theology at St. Patrick's Seminary. And then I left the seminary for what turned out to be, as Archbishop Leveda said at my ordination, a leave of absence of 18 years. Fundamentally, if I had to put it in a sentence, I'd say I left the seminary to see if I could pay the rent. that I needed to be able to provide for myself and be responsible for myself and not just, and learn kind of what it was like to live out there. And so I did. I wanted to be with the poor. I wanted to work with the poor directly. But then I ran into some real problems with that, actually, because what became very important for me was the political. I discovered in a word that has its limits. And what its limits are fundamentally is it doesn't engage the quest for God. And that seemed to me to be ultimately more important, and so that's why the priesthood came back. By the time I'd been away from the seminary for 15 years, I loved my life. I was very happy. So I was always afraid that I'd lose my liberty. And I can say with the utmost surety, very soon after I became a priest, I realized that it was only by giving up my liberty that I could discover my freedom to be myself. Because God called me to be a priest. And that's who I am. And if I hadn't become that, I never would have been free. And then that led to my coming back to the seminary, and to my considerable surprise, I got sent to Rome. When I was first year in the seminary in Rome in 1989, I got to go to Ireland for the first time. My grandparents on my mother's side came out from Ireland crossed in 1905. When I was back in Ireland in 1989, I walked out from Clifton, which is the real town nearby there, right on the west side of Ireland. And on the way back, walking back into Clifton, it struck me. I stopped at one point and I looked at the hills around there, and I realized that I was seeing exactly what my grandparents saw as they went into Clifton to go to Cork to come to the United States. And I came back now and I saw it was a very, very moving moment. I've never forgotten it, that I stood in my grandparents' shoes and saw the future that they didn't see. But if they hadn't taken that step into the unknown, I wouldn't be there. And I came back and was ordained as a priest for the Archdiocese of Portland, and I served in the Salem. Then I was named vocation director for 4 years. And then I was named pastor of Sacred Heart in Medford, where I served for 12 and a half years. Then I came to my original parish at St. Mary's, and I got a call to be, the nuncio said, as if he had known me all my life, he said, "Hello, this is the Apostolic Nuncio, how are you?" And I said, "Well, fine," and wondering what in the world this call was about. And he said, very quickly, just said, "The Pope has named you to be the Bishop of Baker, do you accept?" And that's the shortest job interview I've ever had. And I said, well, yes, not knowing what in the world I'd just done. I was ordained in Bend at St. Francis of Assisi Church in Bend. And it was a beautiful ordination, beautiful, beautiful ordination.
In the years since becoming bishop, Bishop Cary has become a prophetic voice, leading his people as the chief teacher, sanctifier, and governor of his diocese.
Sanctify and govern, I divide my days kind of according to that sometimes. What I would like to do is the preaching part and the teaching. I'm kind of given to that. And then sanctifying is for me, a lot of that is through the celebration of the Eucharist, of course, and then especially confirmation. And that's come increasingly important to me as I've been bishop. Governance has become increasingly interesting to me. It's probably the hardest thing. I'm not drawn to it, but I must say there's parts of it, especially if you do the thing, when something comes off right, that's very good, that's very satisfying. I say that by not so much anything that I do as that someone else does. The Northwest is a particularly militantly secular place, and Catholicism is not a popular religion here. But I guess personally, having grown up here and having absorbed the spirit of where I've lived, I've become more and more confident of the Catholic faith all the time. One of the things about being a Catholic Christian is that you identify yourself with this long tradition that's a public tradition. And some of the greatest minds in history have taken their best shots against the Catholic faith and still do. And so you're putting yourself out here in a public place where this is what I believe. If you take yourself out of that position, step out of that into just unbelief or agnosticism, who's going to ask you? Who's going to ask you what you believe about these fundamental things? You don't have to take a position on them. So you never really have to examine yourself and come to a decision. That could mean that you're missing some of the best things about your life that possibly could be there. Years ago, it struck me that people that reject Christ and reject the church and reject God, I really don't think they've come to grips with how alone they are. If you're throwing God away, throwing Christ away, throwing the church away, what have you got left? It seems to me that one does go back to the very beginning, and that is, every day I begin acknowledging that I'm a creature, that I'm before the mystery of God, that my life is a gift. This is as basic as it can get. If you put the question of faith aside or reject it whatsoever, then how do you stand in relation to the mystery of God? And if you keep putting it aside, what if he's searching for you? Your Maker is searching for you, and you're not listening. The Son of God has died for you and is calling you, and you're not listening.